This week in Billionaires, shares of the LGBTQ dating app Grindr rose by 11% on Monday, following a report that the firm's shareholders were considering taking the company private at a $3 billion valuation. That boosted the net worth of Singapore-based billionaire George Raymond Zage III, who is the largest shareholder in the firm with a 48% stake. Zage and his business partner James Liu are reportedly looking to secure debt financing for the deal. Shane Copland, the 27-year-old founder of blockchain-based prediction platform Polymarket, is now the world's youngest self-made billionaire. His estimated 11% stake in Polymarket is now worth at least $1 billion after Intercontinental Exchange, the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange, announced it was buying a 20% stake in Polymarket for $2 billion, valuing the 5-year-old startup at $9 billion. With the US government shutdown now stretching into its third week, Forbes dug into the finances of the 4 top leaders in Congress. Forbes estimates that Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune is worth $3 million, while Chuck Schumer, his Democratic counterpart, is worth $7 million. In the House, Forbes estimates that Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is worth $2 million, more than 5 times as much as Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson, who is worth $350,000. Welcome to Beyond the Billions. I'm Giacomo Tognini, a deputy editor at Forbes, and joining me today is Kyle Khan Mullins, a reporter for Money and Politics here at Forbes. Kyle, thanks so much for joining me. And, now with the government shutdown going on, does that mean you also don't have to work? How is it affecting you?
Luckily not. I'm still getting paid, unlike a lot of government employees, although I feel like every day there's a new category announced of government employees who were furloughed, and who were not going to get paid, who are now getting paid anyway. Not sure how any of the law works at this point on this.
Yeah, it's wild. But, tell me a bit more about how you came to cover money and politics and sort of that intersection, which is, so core also to Forbes, right? Covering money and wealth, but on the political side.
Yeah, my first introduction to covering money and politics was I interned at Forbes summer of 2022. That was my junior summer internship in college. And then I was hired back, joined Forbes full-time July of 23. So it's been a little over 2 years now. And I've been covering money and politics ever since. I started with a focus on, this is more of an election season type focus, on the major donors in key Senate races, key House races, who were the big billionaires who were funding the political races that, were mattered to Congress. That was the 2022 midterms, was when I was originally covering that. Since joining full-time, I've really pivoted to covering a lot more, focuses more on the finances of politicians themselves, the personal finances. So doing a lot of net worth estimates, business valuations, that kind of stuff. And so that includes Supreme Court justices, members of Congress, presidential candidates, and of course the Trump family.
Yeah, it's fascinating because also, I guess, what is the hardest part of that? Because, on the wealth team before, we're covering the net worths of billionaires. Those can also vary in complexity, right? People with big public stock fortunes or private companies. But when you're getting to politicians, right, a lot of them are quite wealthy. I mean, obviously the president is a multi-billionaire, but a lot of them really aren't, right? And I wonder, is it harder when you're getting sort of further down the wealth scale? How does that process work for you?
I do think that it's harder when you get away from the billion-dollar numbers, because when you're talking about folks with billion-dollar fortunes, that's so much money that they tend to be able, where they made their money. It's right. It's usually a single company that has gone public and done very well, or multiple different business ventures that are all gigantic. The further down you get, the harder it gets to see this is the impact that the company or whatever has made them their money has had. And so I think I would highlight 2 sort of specific difficulties on valuing politicians. You've got the complexity of financial disclosures. Every jurisdiction in the United States has different financial disclosure forms,
and different levels of transparency, right? Some states will tell you more than others. Yeah.
Exactly. And like even the federal ones differ between like Congress and the executive branch and the judicial branch. They all have like slightly different financial disclosure forms with all slightly different rules. And you have to know what is required to be reported, what isn't required to be reported, why things are structured in the way that they are on these forms. And then these documents were just like not made to deal with any sort of like complex assets or fortunes. I was trying to think of a good example before coming on today, and I think like Mike Johnson, for example, is an example of a really simple fortune. Like he owns a home and doesn't have any investment assets. He's not really required to report cash accounts if they don't have interest, so that doesn't show up on his disclosures. But long story short, we don't think he's worth that much. He's worth about $350,000, and so that kind of fortune you can get most of from a financial disclosure. And then there's a couple things that we add on, like the present value of their pensions. But then you've got folks like I was working on this valuation this past summer. Lori Chavez DeRemer, she's the Secretary of Labor. Her husband owns an anesthesiology business that has done very well, and that's a very complex, like a medium-sized business, right? And the disclosures are just not. And then he has investments in a couple other healthcare businesses in the Portland, Oregon area, and the disclosures are just not made to handle fortunes like that and really shed a ton of light into like the actual structures of how they work. So that makes things complicated. Yeah, and then I'll just quickly add that the second point is people get very skittish when talking about money. You know this, reporting on billionaires. But I think politicians get especially skittish when it comes to talking about money. We get like no engagement whatsoever from politicians because they just think that the media is out to get them to some extent, which we're not. But most politicians are not business people, and those who are usually small business owners, so they really try to keep this stuff close to the chest.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting also when you're talking about the anesthesiology business, right? Like that we're used to covering these big fortunes, right? Large companies with a lot of information about them. It's hard to tell, find someone who can tell you how much they'd pay for a middling small business like that. I guess what is something that's really surprised you the most in your reporting on politician fortunes?
A lot of politicians have much more like relatively regular, normal fortunes than people know. I think about Hakeem Jeffries, for example. I just published his net worth. He's the minority leader in the House of Representatives, head of the Democrats. He's worth $2 million. And people see that and think, oh, wow, he's like a multimillionaire. But in the grand scheme of things, $2 million, it's not that high for like a elite, educated, white-collar lawyer from Brooklyn at the
they have a nice
height
home.
of his career.
Yeah,
exactly. Like a big chunk of his net worth is just home equity. I think most Americans, or most older Americans at least, can relate to having some home equity. I certainly can't, but that's a separate issue. And then he's got retirement savings, other investments, and I think it's just it's a pretty like it's a relatively like normal fortune. Like I think the average person could look at that and be like, oh yeah, that's like something I could understand how it works.
Right, and then let's pivot a bit to probably the most famous wealthy politicians, the president and his family. You've reported a lot on his family's fortune, obviously with Dan Alexander, who we had on the show a few weeks ago. And you both recently did a deep dive into the net worths of most of the family members, right? Donald Trump and his kids. So break that down a little bit for us. We've talked about Trump himself, but how does the rest of the family fortune sit right now, and how has it grown since he took office for the second time?
So the top line number, we're estimating that the Trump family fortune is about $10 billion. That's as of the Forbes 400 issue this past September. So, or as of October 1st, I think was our official date. And most of that is the patriarch, Donald Trump himself. But we've now seen substantial fortunes accumulating outside of Donald Trump for really the first time. I mean, we covered his oldest kids, Eric, Don Jr., Ivanka, back in the first Trump administration. I didn't cover them, but the Money and Politics team at Forbes did. And they had good money. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they were I think they were in the tens of millions of dollars. But we're now in the situation where we have at least 5 nine-figure or higher fortunes in the Trump family. Donald Trump is the richest. Ivanka and Jared Kushner are worth over $1 billion as well. Eric Trump was briefly worth over $1 billion, although the stock that drove him over $1 billion, American Bitcoin, has since fallen back to earth a little bit. And then Don Jr. and Barron have pretty substantial fortunes as well, thanks to mostly to crypto investments and such. So that's the state of play right now.
And what have been sort of the biggest drivers of that? When we were talking to Dan, it was interesting to really dive into the fact that crypto has crypto and the developments on the case in New York, right? So we didn't have that liability anymore, but largely crypto was the driver. And it seems like that's also been not so much for Jared and Ivanka, but at least for Don Jr., Eric, and Barron, there's been some real estate, but it's been largely crypto driving it, right? So could you sort of dive into a bit how that's played into their fortunes growing?
Yeah, I think I would put it slightly differently. I think I would say that politics has supercharged everything in Donald Trump's fortune. I mean, he has like this sprawling, relatively complex business empire, right, with lots of different arms and pieces. But like his golf courses and resorts are drawing in wealthy MAGA supporters like never before. And they're more valuable than they used to be. His licensing business has taken off because his brand has recovered since he won the election. Truth Social was the original making money off of politics play, his social media company, and it has a market valuation, I would say, well above what one might expect based on its financials. Its price to earnings ratio is significantly higher than one might expect. And then Don Jr. and Eric and Jared, like you mentioned, Jared, his son-in-law, they're benefiting from, I think they're benefiting from the perception that they are close to the administration, and that's helping them make investments, land lucrative deals that are making them a lot of money. I feel like at this point I should probably put in a disclaimer. Anytime we talk about Truth Social, we should note that Truth Social is currently suing Forbes and multiple other media outlets for an article published that misstated their financials, mistakenly misstated their financials. So just bracketing that in. But you're right. Cryptocurrency has been the most recent driver and has absolutely exploded the Trump family fortune. It's definitely what pushed it well over, up to that 10 billion mark. Dan, I think, talks about selling hype, and I think that's what crypto is selling hype to a large extent. Trump has his meme coin. He has World Liberty Financial. That was, I think, 2 billion or so added to his net worth since last year.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. And then I would say another $450 million flowed to Eric, Don Jr., and Barron. That's about $150 million each. That's just from World Liberty. Eric and Don Jr. have their own crypto venture. That's adding hundreds of millions of dollars more. I mean, it's just like crypto upon crypto upon crypto upon crypto.
Yeah, I mean, like owning it on World Liberty. How has that cryptocurrency venture sort of allowed them to turn this political hype, as you and Dan were saying, into profits, right? Because you just mentioned there sort of briefly that there's been a big windfall for Trump himself, but then also that's been sort of the core of at least Barron's fortune, right? And also has been profitable for Don Jr. and Eric. So how does that work? If you can just break it down a little bit.
Yeah, the basic structure of it is there's a Trump family entity called DT Marks DeFi that owns, I think, 70% of World Liberty Financial, if I'm remembering my statistics correctly. And then of that, Donald Trump, 75%. And then Donald Trump owns 70% of that company. And then we know that Trump family members own the other 30%. Who are those Trump family members? How does that 30% break down? We don't know 100% for sure, but we know that there are 3 Trump family members listed as co-founders. That's Eric, Don Jr., and Barron. And so we assume that each of them gets a 10% stake. So that's the basic breakdown of how. And then we've tracked the revenue streams and the value of different pieces of that company, and then they have a percentage share of each of those. That's how you get to 150 or so million number. Between the tokens that they've been able to sell, the value of the stablecoin business, the value of tokens, World Liberty Financial tokens that they own, which we used to count at 0, but now we don't. But you add it all up, and it comes out to about 150, 160 million for each of the Trump, for each of those, the three Trump sons, plus the vast majority for the man at the top of the ladder. And then you asked about sort of how they've been able to how that plays in with the politics. I think the really key thing is that crypto is like wildly unregulated, right? Like there's almost no regulation on this industry. I think the first major law was passed just this year that was regulating only stablecoins.
That's the Genius Act, right? I think.
Yeah, the Genius Act, signed by Donald Trump, who owns a big chunk of his own stablecoin company. I mean, we are talking about this is just another piece of it. Is like no political family has ever attempted to profit off of politics in the way that the Trump family has ever before while someone was in office, right? I mean, you can look back at the Clintons, for example, and they made something like $200 million after Bill Clinton left office. And, you know, Hillary Clinton, for much of that time, was a senator, and then she ran for president. She was Secretary of State. So you could argue that, you know, she was profiting off of politics while in office. But I mean, it even that number, which is huge, pales in comparison to what the Trumps are able to do. And so you have this like unregulated market. You have the fact that the Trumps are just willing to profit off of politics in a way that no political family previously has. And then you have the fact that crypto is like very untraceable, right? And you know, theoretically it's supposed to be, you know, everything's on the blockchain, everything's transparent, but in practice it's very difficult to figure out where all this money is coming from. I'm reminded that, like, you know, our colleague Zach Everson got his start covering Trump by like staking out the Trump Hotel in DC, and he could see who was going in and out and who was staying and who was getting rooms there. And you know, that's a physical thing that's being transacted that you can track, and to some extent, right? And you can't do that with crypto. So put all those things together and you have a very very interesting mix of things going on.
Yeah, and another super interesting thing that makes, for me at least, and you mentioned earlier, is the meme coin business, right? Not only did the president have a meme coin, but the First Lady, Melania Trump, also has her meme coin, right? So how does that, and is that even less traceable, sort of even tougher to value just because of the volatile nature of it?
So Melania's meme coin is interesting. It's not that it's hard to trace because of the untraceable value of it. It's because we don't know the structure of the deal and how the business was set up. So we get financial disclosures for politicians once a year, and those are usually a snapshot on, you know, January 1st of the year. But if there are changes shortly after January 1st, we won't know until the following May or June when they file the next year's January 1st snapshot, right? So this past year, you know, Donald Trump files his financial disclosure on January 1st, or he filed it in May or June for January 1st, 2025. But he launched the meme coin, and Melania also launched her meme coin like 2 or 3 weeks after that. And so we won't actually know, we don't have good visibility into the structure of that deal. We don't know how much money she made, if any, and how she did so. Was it a stake in the business? Is she getting paid in tokens? Is she being paid in actual cash? We don't know the answer to that. So she's made money in other ways, right? She had a signed a deal with Amazon to do a documentary. She you know, gave speeches, that kind of thing. But the meme coin is really the black box at the center of Melania's fortune.
Yeah, that's fascinating. But I guess we do have more visibility on some of the kids, right? So I know when you're writing about Eric, you were looking at the fact that, you know, a few years ago he was only worth 40 million. Now he's up to 750 million. He was even briefly over $1 billion. And obviously, you know, I reported on him a little bit too. Eric is very involved with the, you know, Trump Organization real estate business, but the bulk of his fortune is from American Bitcoin, right? So how does that work? So how did he get involved, and how has it become such a valuable asset for him?
I would add to your question, he's also got this like SPAC that he's started that is looking for a venture, that is looking for a company to buy and merge with, and he's got this company called Dominary Holdings that he and his brother both sit on the board of. That's kind of become like almost a private investment bank for the Trump brothers. So you've got all these little ventures all going on at the same time. Eric has. It seems that he has been more involved and more focused on the Trump family business. He's still an executive vice president of the company. Same with his brother Don Jr. And the two of them get a larger stake of the foreign deals than they used to, in the sense that they now get a stake in the foreign deals. I don't know if they always did. Um, so, for example, some of the most recent deals, they appear to have gotten a roughly 10% stake in each of them, which has translated to millions of dollars. So if we'll see a payment like $5 million to Donald Trump, and that represents 80%, and so that they each get $500,000 from an initial payment for a tower in. I think that one might have been the Abu Dhabi tower, but there are several across the Middle East.
Vietnam, all over the Middle East as well, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You just had a piece on Vietnam just the other day, right? The deal there.
That one was also 5 million initially. So yeah, they're racking up those deals. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So you got all of this money sloshing around with those. But you're right. The bulk of Eric's fortune is coming from this American Bitcoin company. When he talks about why he got into crypto, it was because he talks about in the wake of January 6th, a lot of financial institutions stopped doing business with the Trumps. And so he says that he was debanked and he was looking for ways to get outside the traditional financial system, and that led him to crypto. And so American Bitcoin is a Bitcoin treasury company. Their goal is to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible and then hope the value goes up. And as far as I can tell, they are, lined up to do that. They've purchased a bunch of Bitcoin mining machines that solve the cryptographic codes that unlock Bitcoin. And as of the time it went public earlier this year, almost all of the Bitcoin they had accumulated so far was pledged to the company they bought the machines from. But going forward, I think they're going to be able to keep a lot more of that Bitcoin for themselves and actually start building that treasury that they're talking about. So this is another one of those companies that the price to earnings ratio is probably speculative, higher than one might expect given the past performance of the company, but that's because the company is so new. So this is like I said, it's speculative, and we'll see whether he's able to push that into something that makes him a billionaire, which I think is certainly possible. He already made him a billionaire once, right?
Right, yeah.
And I think that just to add one more thing, the stock has slid, even since that you quoted that 750 million number. That's where it was at. That's where his overall net worth was at with the Forbes 400. I think he's probably down about 100 million or so, just based on American Bitcoin stock sliding. Since then, I looked at the math this morning. So the other thing is the stock is volatile. It's going to swing back and forth. So these things change by the day.
Yeah, I guess that similar to Truth Social, right? It's been super volatile.
Yeah.
Too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Very good comparison. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then moving on, Don Jr., he's been a lot more focused kind of on the sort of anti-woke economy, right? He's also on the board of, I think, 1789 Capital is the name, but how has he sort of been going around diversifying his business?
He's been on the anti-woke economy train for years. So even going back to like the first Trump administration and then the Biden administration before Trump came into office the second time, Don Jr. has been the more political brother, the more vocally, openly political brother. He launched a podcast called Triggered. He wrote books about MAGA, arguing for why his father should be reelected in 2020. He founded a lifestyle brand that was sort of kind of conservative coded. It was a lot of hunting and outdoorsy type stuff. So he's been on this train for a while, but it's definitely picked up after the election. It was rumored that he was going to join the administration, and then in the end, very shortly after his father won the election, he announced that he was joining as a partner at 1789 Capital, which is this like anti-woke investment venture capital company. And after that, he's been on a roll of these kinds of deals. He has, I mentioned Dominary Holdings, but he's also got, he's on the board of a drone company that is trying to make a big play manufacturing drones. Cryptocurrency has certainly become a conservative coded business at this point, now that the sort of MAGA movement has embraced it. And then my personal favorite is he's on the board of an online firearms retailer, and its ticker symbol is PEW, P-E-W.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And so the biggest cash flow from all of this stuff continues to be World Liberty Financial, his stake there, and American Bitcoin. We don't know his exact stake in American Bitcoin, so that makes things a little bit difficult. We just know he's an investor. But I mean, yeah, that is he is like very firmly on the anti-woke economy train, and it seems to be working out for him pretty well.
Yeah, and another Trump family member for whom the last couple of years have been very lucrative is Barron, right? The youngest. He's still in college, but you wrote this fantastic story recently looking at how he's built I think, $150 million fortune, right? And he was also, I believe, the one who Trump himself was credited with really pushing him more to look at crypto and sort of engage in that world. So how has Barron, as young as he is, been getting involved in that?
Yeah, Barron has made a lot of money for a college sophomore. I like to think, I spent my college years working at the student newspaper, and from a financial perspective, that was not as lucrative a option as going in on a crypto company started mostly by my dad. It's pretty remarkable. I think Barron is like a really, really interesting piece of all of this because, again, we're assuming he has this 10% stake in the Trump family's stake in World Liberty Financial. That translates to about $150–160 million. Trump has talked about how Barron is partially responsible for getting him into crypto in the first place. He's talked about how he taught him what a crypto wallet is. And I think Barron deserves some credit there for, if you're able to get your extremely famous father into a business that could then turn around and make you and your brothers and, and him a lot of money. That's, I think there's some salesman acumen there, for lack of a better word. He seems to have been able to, I mean, again, assuming he has this stake, it's been extremely lucrative for him, and a lot of the returns there are not stakes in the business. It's cash. He has cash, and he is about half of that $150 million we think is just from the sale of World Liberty tokens, and that is $80 million is like a lot of cash to sit on. He could put that in the S&P 500 and he's set for life. So
yeah, and I'm sure he'll have other interesting business opportunities coming to him for that money, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the cash part, but then I know that there's also the actual World Liberty tokens themselves that I believe the family also owns, and I know that we weren't counting them for a while, then we're discounting them, and then there's the tokens that I think they still haven't unlocked, which could be worth a lot more. So if you could sort of dumb that down a little and I guess explain how it works in terms of what it actually means for their fortunes.
Totally. I'll start at like the beginning here. So when World Liberty was founded, I believe the initial like volume of tokens that was created was about 30 billion World Liberty tokens. They use the ticker symbol WLFI, World Liberty Financial. I actually don't know what the I is. But it's $ WLFI. And the Trump family got 22.5 billion, if I'm doing the math correctly. And so that means that yes, tokens, exactly.
Yeah.
And then so that's the Trump family entity got that. And so 10% of that 22.5 billion is 2.25 billion tokens. That's what we assume each of Barron, Eric, and Don Jr. They all have. We're estimating 2.25 billion tokens. Now, the weird thing about World Liberty Financial is when it was started, you weren't allowed to sell the tokens. You could buy them and hold on to them, but they could not be resold. And so Barron and his father and his brothers all got these tokens, but they couldn't actually do anything with them. And we valued them essentially at zero because they were like unexercisable warrants of a stock. Like they just couldn't be used. And so we routinely would come back to the table and say, can we value these at something? And the answer we kept coming to was no, that we can't in good faith say that these are actually worth anything right now because the value is entirely locked up. They weren't allowed to be resold. This year, very recently, retail owners of World Liberty are able to vote on governance for the company, and they voted to unlock 20% of the tokens that had been released on the public market. So suddenly you now had something that was actually being traded, bought and sold publicly. And so that helps. That suddenly gives us a price to work with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is they only voted to unlock some of the publicly traded some of the publicly available tokens. They didn't unlock the tokens that are owned by the leaders of the company, Donald,
Mm-hmm.
Eric, Don Jr., Barron. And so because of that, we can't value them at the publicly traded price. It doesn't make sense to do that. They still can't, like Barron cannot go today to any of the crypto exchanges and sell his tokens. He's not allowed to do that. But we thought what he might be able to do is he could theoretically borrow against the value of those tokens. Now they might have some value, but at a very heavy discount. And so we talked this over. Dan Alexander is the one who spearheaded a lot of this. So I'm saying we, knowing that a lot of this is Dan, not me. But they ultimately they discounted by about 90%. And so we're heavily discounting these tokens on the grounds that they cannot currently be sold, but might be able to be in the future. And so that's how these tokens work. So he's got about 2.25 billion tokens. I think the current price when we valued these, they were trading at about 20 cents a token. I think that's down in recent days to about 15 cents. So that would hurt the value of his tokens a little bit, but we were heavily discounting it even from that 20-cent mark.
Right, and I guess down the line, were they to be all unlocked at a similar price, it would still be worth an enormous amount for them, right?
Yeah, we calculated over $500 million, and that's just for Barron.
Wow.
If they were valued at the publicly traded price, then they could theoretically be worth that much. Now, there's of course the question of if the guy who has 2.25 billion tokens, or what the 7x that Trump has, if they were to suddenly come onto the market and start selling, that would be a surge of supply onto the market that would drive the price down. So you gotta look at the sort of liquidity of it as well. But I think, theoretically at least, we're talking about, on the order of billions of dollars these tokens could be worth.
Mm-hmm. And then what I've also found interesting is that of the eldest Trump kids, the one that's sort of been least in the news or least involved at all really in any of these businesses is Ivanka, right? She's been more, I guess, in the news before the activities of her husband, Jared Kushner, who we recently wrote about being a billionaire, largely thanks to his stake in his family's real estate business, as well as his private equity from Affinity Partners. How, I guess, do you view sort of how they fit into these wider changes in the first family's fortunes?
If you'd asked me like a couple of weeks ago about this, I would have said that they were a almost totally separate branch of the family fortune. Ivanka definitely has, we estimate that most of her personal fortune, separate from Jared's, came from her work for the Trump Organization for years. So that's something, right? But it is a mostly separate branch. And then, in the last week or two now, I don't even remember when it happened. Jared Kushner is on a plane to the Middle East to negotiate a Gaza ceasefire deal on Trump's behalf, which I didn't realize he was in the administration this time around. So all of a sudden, these things are kind of coming back together. I almost want to throw this back on you, Giacomo, because you and Monica Hunter-Hart were the sort of lead reporters on the Jared Kushner and Ivanka side of things for this most recent round of evaluations. What stuck out to you? What connections did you see between the Trump family fortune and theirs? What stuck out? I think that's the biggest question.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, on Ivanka's side, I believe her largest asset now is what we assume is her sort of half of the house that she and Jared own in Indian Creek Island, which is by some measures the most exclusive island and piece of real estate in the U.S. There was an empty lot that sold in June, I believe, next door to Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and it sold for $105 million, just the land. And so that led us to revalue their home by a lot, which they have a mortgage, $15 million mortgage on it, but still nets out to about $45 million for Ivanka. So
that's incredible.
I believe that's her largest asset. Jared, right, founded this private equity firm in 2021, which he has said, and I think to some extent it's true, January 2021 was sort of the lowest point for Trump's image, right? In terms of, you mentioned Eric talking about being debanked, but it was sort of not a time when many people were politically or financially betting on Trump. That's when he started his private equity firm. And then many of his largest investors, his largest investor is the Saudi Public Investment Fund. Then he got investors from the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund, a fund in the UAE. These are countries where he had developed relationships over the course of his first term in office. And then now he started slow, and then over the last couple of years, and honestly, especially this year, he's really started deploying a lot more of those funds. I mean, we spoke with him last year, we spoke with him this year as well for our stories. And another thing he pointed out was that, so he had raised $3.1 billion, and then last year he raised $1.5 billion. I think around the time I think it was before the election. And so he's basically said, these sort of funding rounds he's had, amounts of funding he's brought in are basically about his ability to find good investments, to connect the right people, and he has a pretty good track record so far. It's not a large private equity firm, but they've had some pretty good wins, with the company in Israel, for example, that we wrote about in the story, QXO, a company in the US as well, and a few others. So he doesn't have a crypto project, right? He's not involved in the Trump family business, but he is sort of in the general orbit. And I think to your point, I think last year, and definitely before the election, he had basically said he was not going to return to the White House in any official capacity, and he hasn't. But the last month has been really big for him, right? I think the week before he went to Gaza, he was involved in the deal to take Electronic Arts private for $50 billion, which I think is the biggest leverage buyout in history. So I think it's interesting. I agree with you. They are a separate branch, and he's kind of just become a very prominent figure sort of in his own right. But then, when Trump needs him to help out with something, in this case with the Gaza ceasefire deal, he's willing to do it. And so, for better or worse, for him and the Trumps, he is still sort of tangentially involved. And I agree, it's valuation-wise, it's completely separate, right? There's pretty much no overlap. But when we're looking at sort of how he's building his investments, actually there is one asset where there's overlap, which is the Trump organization announced earlier this year a project to build a hotel in Belgrade in Serbia. And that is one where it's Jared's private equity firm Affinity Partners partnering with a billionaire developer from the UAE, Mohammed Al-Abbar, and the project is being licensed. It's going to be a Trump property. So that is one piece of overlap. But outside of that, yeah, I agree with you. It's sort of they're a separate branch, and he is somewhat involved, I guess, in politics now, or at least in diplomacy, however you want to call it. Yeah.
Sure. It's a really remarkable turnaround for them. And I mean, I think that's the story of the Trump family over the past 4 or 5 years, is going from that lowest point, like you said, where people were counting them out to some extent, to now returning to the presidency, to the White House, and growing their fortune by multiples to boot.
Yeah, I mean, so much has happened already this year, and I'm sure there's going to be so much more work for both of us and Dan and others to keep looking at.
Oh yeah.
But it's been fascinating talking to you, Kyle, today, and thanks for coming on.
Always great to be here. Thanks, Giacomo. Really appreciate you.
To read Kyle's story about the fortunes of the Trump family and the other stories we mentioned in this episode, you can find them in the show notes.